I got chips. Mate, this isn't a good time. Yeah, okay, but I got chips. I want chips. Alright, come on in then. Classic Ryan. Or should that be Revival series Ryan? Good one. Yay! Wait, what about me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Well, I hope so, otherwise this is all pointless. On with the review. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, Nick here, and welcome to my Revisitation review of Doctor Who Series 12, Episode 7, Can You Hear Me? With a question mark at the end. As mentioned at the end of the practice review, Revisitation review, this is the second Doctor Who story to have a symbol at the end of the title, a question mark this time, whilst the previous Episode 7, Kablam, had an exclamation mark at the end. So I'm expecting Episode 7 of Series 11 to have a literary symbol at the end of the title of that episode. We'll see how it goes. There will be at least 8 episodes next series, whether that's 7 in a special or 8 in a special or just 8. We'll see how it goes. But there's definitely going to be 8. If it's 8 in a special, we might be looking at a 9th episode. So, can you hear me? And fun fact about this episode, this is the only episode from Series 12 I changed my score of when rewatching it for each story for the third time before the original ranking. This was the only one I decided to change the score of, and then re-edited the original review score. So it went down from 8 to 7 out of 10 for the original review. Of course, now we've had every story from Orphan 55 to Praxis have their scores changed, either going up or down in some degree in these Revisitation reviews. Can you hear me follow suit? No, this one's staying as a 7. Spoiler alert for the score at the end. But why? Why was Can You Hear Me so good on a first and maybe even second viewing? But when it comes to later viewings, it doesn't quite hold the same impact. Let's jump into Can You Hear Me? So the plot of Can You Hear Me sees the Doctor take her companions back to Sheffield in 2020, reusing a shot from Arachnids in the UK. Seriously, they're the exact same shots. They got a bit lazy here. On a specific day for Yaz, as it's the day that a few years earlier, about 3 years ago, she ran away from home due to bullying from school, and her parents didn't know what was up, and so she decided to just run away. Her sister, Sonia, fearing that she might do something stupid, such as suicide or maybe turn to a life of crime, contacts the police to find Yaz. And at the end of the episode, we see Yaz remembering this. We see a police officer comes and finds Yaz and has a talk with her and makes a deal with her to come back in 3 years and let her know how things are going. And if things haven't turned out, then the police officer will give Yaz £50. I think that was right. But if Yaz has a good life, she gives the police officer 50p. As we see at the end, Yaz gives the police officer 50p as promised. This is also probably the explanation of why Yaz decided to join the police force, hence why she became a police officer, or at least a probational police officer. Though in all honesty, the timelines don't quite match up, because she was a 2-year probationary police officer in Series 11, but here it's 3 years since she ran away, so it'd only make her 1-year probationary officer in Series 11. My guess is that when the script was being written, they thought they were going to make a 2019 air date, but it ended up being 2020. Unless we say this episode took place in 2019, then maybe we can excuse it, or maybe it was just a 1-year probationary for Series 11, and blame the fact that the broadcast dates were changed. Meanwhile, Ryan goes off to meet his friend Tibbo, who we saw in Spyfall Part 1, whilst Graham goes off to meet a couple mates and play some card games. And during this time, the Doctor goes back in time to Aleppo, Syria, in the 13th century. 14th century. It's 1380 or something. So 14th century Syria, where she meets this woman who's at this hospital place. The people of Aleppo were very well advanced with their medicines and mental health and mental illness combating. They were certainly more advanced in it than most other people in the world at the time. And so the doctor meets this woman called Tahila, who's at this 14th century equivalent of a hospital, and they realize that there's these creatures running around the place to heal his fears, so to speak. And they kind of look like werewolf beasts, but they're not very well designed. They're not a very well designed monster, and the CGI makes it even worse. Meanwhile, in the 21st century, a godlike being called Zelin has come to give people fears. He's come to absorb on their fears, feed on their fears. He feeds on Yaz's fear about her running away a few years ago, which is what the celebratory dinner is. Celebration of the day Yaz ran away but then came back. But also Thibaut has a bit of mental illness as well. He's feeling depressed and he's feeling lonely. So Zelin also takes his fears about that and his anxieties, and he feeds on other people across the city. Meanwhile, Graham is contacted by another godlike being to ask for help as they are trapped, supposedly by Zelin. Realizing all of this is connected, the Doctor and her companions meet up, and along with Tahila, they head to the future where there's this platform over edge of two planets. They're almost crashing into each other, but there's something holding them apart, and it's revealed that this other godlike being is trapped in the middle. When the Doctor releases her, it's soon revealed that she's actually Zelen's partner. They turn out to be godlike beings called the Immortals, who, like the Eternals in Enlightenment, are godlike beings who can live forever. They're also like the Guardians from the Key to Time saga, season 16, the Key to Time stories, and the Black Guardian trilogy in season 20, which includes Enlightenment. And they actually name drop the Eternals and the Guardians, as well as the Toymaker from the Celestial Toymaker. Great references, by the way. Really happy to have those references in the episode. Zelin was also a really great and effective villain, and Ian Gelder, who voiced the remnant rapping creatures in the last series in The Ghost Monument, he is fantastic as Zelin. He's probably my favourite individual villain of the series. He's really great, and Ian Gelder is brilliant in the role. However, his character is slightly undermined when the other immortal is said to be more powerful than him, and it kind of does undermine him as a villain. Maybe if they were the same powerful creatures, it would have made sense. But as this new person is coming in halfway through the story, it's another twist villain, like we saw in the previous episode. So kind of suppose Fugitive of the Jadoon, I suppose, with Gat. But this other immortal turns out to be a twist villain, someone who tricks the Doctor and companions into helping them, and is now going off to feed on lots more fears on Earth, and they have all of eternity to go and do so. But the new character isn't quite as interesting as Zelin. She's an effective villain, but she's not as interesting as Zelin, and isn't as creepy either. So I don't think she's quite as good. So it is a bit of a shame to say that she's more powerful than Zelin. It's just a shame that we're building this great villain up, and then he's kind of knocked down a peg because this other villain is slightly more powerful. And we don't really know them as much as we did with Zelin. We got to know Zelin a little bit more. Mainly more so in those conversation scenes with the Doctor, but there were some fun conversation scenes. Whilst this is all happening, the companions and Tahila are put into sleep, and they are made to experience their darkest fears. Yaz, again, it's to do with her running away. Ryan's is him being away from Earth and his friends and family for a long time. And when he comes back, Earth has been destroyed, it's been bombarded, it's on fire, and Thibaut is an old man who has missed Ryan, and Ryan just feels like he's missed his friend's life, and Earth is being destroyed. We also have an actually great surprise cameo of the dregs from Orphan 55 appearing in this scene. I guess what Ryan saw in Orphan 55 contributes to his fears of missing his friend's life and Earth being destroyed, and then them turning into dregs, as we saw. Also, the dregs are shot and edited much better in these quick appearances than in their first few seconds of appearance in Orphan 55, and they also look a bit more realistic. We just have the costumes here, not so much. There isn't as much CGI for the dregs in this scene, so we just have the costumes and the masks, and they look a bit more effective. And actually, And it was actually quite shocking to see. And it was actually quite a surprise to see them back. It was great to cut straight to the face of the first dreg and then a couple shots of the dregs. And it was actually quite creepy, as opposed to in Orphan 55, where they weren't so creepy. The way that episode was executed, when it was the way they were executed in that episode, wasn't very creepy. But this time round, it was handled pretty well. As for Graham, his fear is that his cancer will return, and he has a dream about Grace coming back and letting him know that her cancer is back, and asking him why didn't he save her. So this relates back to Graham's arc in Series 11, where he was getting over the grief of Grace's death, but also blaming himself for her dying, and wishing that it was him instead who had gone up and had died in her place. And as we saw in Spyfall, he is worried about his cancer coming back, and he's still worried about it here. This leads him to that conversation scene with the Doctor at the very end of the episode, where he lets it out, and I think that's handled really well. But the Doctor's response, yeah, I've got to agree with the mass. It wasn't really well handled. I can understand what they were going for. The Doctor doesn't really know what to say. That's a real life thing. When someone tells somebody they don't have cancer, they're not entirely sure what to say next. And this is a more socially awkward and the 13th Doctor is one of the more socially awkward ones. But that being said, even if the Doctor didn't really have some reassuring words for Graham, when they admit that they don't know what to say, they can at least explain why it's they're not sure what to say. It's difficult to find the right words for it, and you, despite being someone who can come up with the right words for any situation, this is one of the more difficult times. As a possible bonus, they could actually come up with something in a moment, but they have to go and think about it for a minute. Just something to make it a bit more apparent that the Doctor couldn't quite find the right words for it, and is either going to come back to Graham later, or is just going to, or just isn't able to give him a full answer, as opposed to just saying, I'm just going to go over here and then say something I should have said something, and then say something I should have said earlier. I don't think they quite got it there. I think the Doctor should have been more uncertain and just flat out admitted they don't know what to say, and basically let that go with, and basically let Graham know that. But also maybe be reassuring, saying, well, we're here for you, it's going to be okay, don't worry too much. Something to at least make it seem that the Doctor, whilst they can't really give a proper answer, is still able to try and be helpful at the same time whilst being very honest. But like I said, I can understand what they were going for. The climax of this episode, I believe, isn't that great. They just confront the Immortals at the very end in Syria. Tahina uses her monster creature beast thing to trap them in female Immortals bubble thing forever. And then we have a couple minutes to spend on wrapping up Yaz's stuff, Ryan and Tibbo going to see, I think that's friends and family, I'm not entirely sure, to talk about his depression and loneliness, and then the Brian and Doctor scene I just mentioned before, a little teaser for the next episode as well. I think the climax was rushed. I think it could have been eased out a little bit more, and we could have had maybe these creatures tying into the mental illness stuff at least a little bit better. In fact, we might not even have needed to go to Aleppo. We could have even cut all of that and just focused on these creatures being representation of mental illness and anxieties and depression. An episode that did this really well was Vincent and the Doctor, which had a monster that was invisible to everyone except Vincent van Gogh, and this represents Vincent van Gogh's depression and mental illness, which he had at the time, and nobody else could see. They all thought he was ill. He got drunk quite a lot, so a lot of people just thought he was ill and or mad. And it was paintings and seeing the lovely colours in the universe that was able to he was able to keep pushing forward and making paintings, which after his death are considered some of the best paintings in the world, and he as one of the greatest painters and artists. But in his time, he was looked down upon by local town folks, people, and he was seen as an ill madman, as opposed to a misunderstood genius who unfortunately had depression at the time, and that's what led him to take his own life. Even in the Doctor Who universe, when he got some new lease of life at the end of the story, he still took his life around a year after the events of those stories, and the monster in that story fantastically represents what Vincent van Gogh went through. In this episode, what we got with the Immortals does play in well with what the message is trying to get across, but it is stuffing quite a lot of stuff into this story with mainly with the Aleppo stuff and having two villains to an extent and not really fleshing out one of them, but introducing this other one takes some of the power away from the one we've been introduced to, and that was the one who was more fleshed out, whilst the newer one we don't really get as much time with. And the story just rushes its climax before we can have the more calmer wrap up with the characters under their depression and stuff. This is also the first episode in a while where we actually got to learn something about Yaz. This is actually the first episode since, I believe, Demons of the Punjab, where we've actually learnt something about Yaz, where about her running away, and then her sister calling the police to try and find her, and then Yaz eventually accepting this policewoman's offer, and then going off to join the police force, and her and Sonia marking the date with a special dinner. By the way, Sonia acts very differently in this episode compared to previous appearances. Although I can understand what she's feeling, as she was worried about her sister running away off and doing something stupid a few years ago, and she's glad to see her here, and they celebrate the dinner. But this is a very different portrayal of the character to what we've previously seen. And I think the problem is the fact we barely see much of Yaz's family. Outside of Arachnids in the UK and Demons of the Punjab, they've only really popped up for minor appearances in the first two episodes of this series. And yeah, that's it. In fact, actually, even in Demons of the Punjab, they only had minor appearances. It was mainly around Nanny Umbreen, who should come back, by the way. And they just don't really have that much of an impact in these two series. The most impact is in Arachnids in the UK with Nadia, and this episode with Sonia, plus also Nanny Umbreen in Demons. That being said, they're still much more fleshed out than Moira from Series 10. I'm not getting over that. I did like that animated segment where they had the story of the two immortals and the planets they were playing with before, and it was really well done. It reminds me a lot of the Three Brothers story scene from Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 1, where they used animation to tell the story without interrupting the live action stuff. It was really fun. Also, this is canonically the first official Doctor Who story to use animation in a live-action episode, and not including the reanimated missing episodes in that description, by the way, that they're reanimated missing episodes, but the original episodes themselves didn't have animation in them. So this is the first episode to be live-action, but include a piece of animation in them, as opposed to the episode being reanimated due to being missing, or the story being reanimated due to being missing. And none of the official, originally made animated stories like Scream the Schalke, Infinite Quest, Dreamland, the 2003 Shada, etc., had live action segments in those. So overall, Can You Hear Me has the potential to be a fantastic episode, but there's some things that don't quite fit right with it. Maybe if you took out the Aleppo stuff, maybe if the story focuses on the companions and their friends and their fears and anxieties, friends and family and their fears and anxieties, and maybe just have one villain, maybe just the one immortal villain, then this story has the potential to be the best story of the series. But unfortunately, it kind of falls flat a bit of a distance away from the end, especially that climax, which isn't very good. So overall, I will be giving Can You Hear Me a 7 out of 10. Yes, unfortunately, this episode kind of stumbles over many hurdles prior to getting to the end, and that's even before we got to the climax, but the climax is the real letdown of the episode. The story as it is, but with a better climax, might have reached that 8 out of 10 I originally gave it, but on reflection, the climax wasn't very good. It was probably the weakest climax since The Witchfinders. No, I take that back, Orphan 55 is the worst one. But besides Orphan 55, this is probably the weakest climax of the series, arguably. So that's what lets it down so badly. What's also quite disappointing is that this is the first time, as mentioned, this is the first time we've learned about something about Yaz in a while, and it's like we're halfway through her tenure as a companion if she leaves at the end of Series 13. This is halfway through her tenure. So, yeah, it's only like This is episode 7 of series 12. We had 11 episodes of series 11. This is episode 18 of, at time of recording, 22 episodes, with at least another 8 on the way. So out of at least 30 episodes, we're over halfway. And only now are we actually starting to learn about stuff from Yaz's past. And not even that much. It's too little too late, Chibnall. Which is just a shame. I'm sure Charlene James, the main writer of this story, had a really great story here, and Chibnall wanted to put the character stuff for the companions, but together they just overstuffed the story, which is a bit of a disappointment, and as I mentioned, stops it from being an outstanding story, and because of that, it doesn't even quite reach great, let alone the potential outstanding mark. But it could have been worse. It could have been a bad way to talk about mental illness and depression. So at least it managed to at least succeed in talking about that. It just could have been even better. So that's it from my Revisitation review of Can You Hear Me? Thank you for watching. I'll see you guys next time for my favourite episode of Doctor Who Series 12, The Haunting of Villa Diodati. I'll see you guys then. Goodbye. Don't forget to click below to subscribe to the Nicholas Payne YouTube channel.